So, our next presenter is also a multi-time SummerStrong Hall of Famer. This person I've known, we've done business for 20 plus years, back when I wouldn't say started, but we were both younger. Both younger. And Pete Bommarito has run Bommarito Performance Systems for, 20 years, down in Florida. And if you ever watch the NFL Combine, you'll generally see a lot of his athletes blowing up the numbers, whether it be speed, jumps, things like that. Over the years, I've been with him at the Combine. Very, very often the fastest or the top 3 fastest athletes at the Combine are generally Bommarito athletes. He knows the secret sauce. He knows how to make millionaires out of college football players. It's really, really interesting to see how he's developed and some of the innovative things that he's done within the industry. He's a good friend of ours. It's been fun to watch his growth, watch his dominance in the place, and we're really happy to have him back with us. Pete Bommarito.
Thanks, man. Okay, so the conjugate method, I'm going to try to do an application of different types of conjugate systems, how to apply it to the field. So just getting started with the basics now. The good thing about the literature that's out there for conjugate is it's been brought to this country and really popularized by the powerlifting world. And if you just look at the bare essentials, not necessarily a powerlifting workout, but look at the literature and the data they presented in terms of how the basic paradigm split is. If you have, let's say, a 4-day week lift, and you're looking at upper strength or max effort work, lower dynamic, upper dynamic, and then the lower strength, max effort. You could also take different types of strength. It could be moderate strength. It could be slower tempo type strength work. It doesn't necessarily have to be max effort, but that is the literature that came through. So it's a great thing that the powerlifting crowd translated a lot of the literature from different countries and brought it and popularized it for their system. But I'm going to talk about this a lot. When you read literature, understand that they're speaking to their audience, and you need to speak to your audience, and you need to program to your audience. So conceptually, the conjugate method has some brilliant concepts, but it not necessarily saying you can take a workout that is geared towards powerlifting, the sport. The sport of powerlifting is all the exercises are geared towards improving on bench, squat, and deadlift. But if you just look at the concept of conjugate itself and try to transition it into different types of programming. So let's say that you're programming for an athlete that needs to move, has to sprint, has to change directions, has to, whether it's long-range sprinting or, short motions, like what a tennis player, volleyball player, different types of jumping and short-range motions like basketball. When you're programming for those sports, a lot of your assistance auxiliary exercises have to support exactly what it is that you're training for. So if you just go right into some of the essentials, let's say that we're looking at the lower dynamic day. Now, a lot of the literature that was out there that's been popularized by many types of systems looks at things like a speed box squat, which is great. It's an essential, great option for a lower dynamic day within a conjugate method. However, there is different things that can be added into the equation. Number one is when you're looking at the box squat, can you go a speed high box squat? Can you work on the speed belt squat? The different types of bars. Now, I'm kind of partial to the transformer bar only because it's extremely useful for my dynamic of how I train and the volume that I have to train in a given day with different types of athletes, because you can change it very, very quickly from a high bar Olympic position to a low bar powerlifting position to a front load to a standard cambered bar or safety squat bar to a hinge to even like a goblet squat type setting. So because it can be changed very, very quickly, it looks like a safety squat bar, but you can just change the dynamic in terms of the load. And then obviously the variable loading, which we all know, it's chains or bands or chains and bands. With, again, slight modifications if you're coming out of the powerlifting type scripts and into athletes that you just don't have enough time to train them on things like the max effort squat. And that's the main thing. The sport of powerlifting is the squat. The sport of football or basketball is the sport. So you're gonna have a shorter window of specialization in terms of getting that max effort work up. So the variable loading has to be taken into account. If you're a highly trained athlete and your sport is performance on the squat, you have a lot more time to develop that squat. Hence, the variable loading can be a lot more aggressive. So you're gonna see some differences in how the variable loading looks from the videos that I'm showing. So let's just take the squat itself out of the powerlifting world and putting into what you might do a conjugate method for different types of sports, okay? So this is a high box position right here. You see the 2-1-X tempo. Now, the main thing is when you are pausing on the box, you are not relaxing. Now, I know there's some different methodology to this. Actually, stop the video right here. So this is an interesting one here. If you look at this super high box, you look at the high box of the previous one, about 50 degrees. This one's a lot shorter. This was interesting because we're going on an X1X tempo, number one. We progressed from a 2-1X tempo to an X1X tempo. This is actually more challenging than people think because you've got to dynamically, eccentrically load, but catch yourself right before the box and stay tight without crashing into the box. Hence, the reversal strength and the isometric is there. Then you take the eccentric out of it in terms of exploding up through the chain and band tension. This is almost how we peak. So we will get into a moderate or regular box squat on a slower tempo, progress week 2 on a conjugate into like maybe the 2-1X. And sometimes if we're trying to peak, especially for a high velocity sprinting athlete like this running back here, a lot of times we're having good success with that potentiation factor of going off an extremely high box with this tempo. Now you see the variable load. We've got 2 strong bands plus 4 chains. So you're gonna be able to variable load great. In addition to one other factor, you see how all the chain tension is on the ground. Now, if you look at, and I've seen a lot of great powerlifting cycles where the chains are kind of half off the ground, half on the ground. This is a lot easier, but it's a lot more conducive to people that don't have a lot of time to develop the squat. Like this athlete had 8 weeks post-season to get ready for a huge event. So there's not much you can do in 8 weeks for somebody that hasn't squatted in 7 months. You see what I'm saying? So hence, it is easier because you're a lot more unloaded at the depth of the squat, and you can accelerate a lot easier, but it's extremely heavy at the top. So go ahead and play it, the video. So this is actually a slow motion version. The thing is main thing is you notice the hinge. Without the rock back, it's the butt goes back and the chest goes forward. Now this is the true box squat on an X1X tempo. This actually is the strong band single loop. So again, completely unloaded at the bottom, but extremely heavy at the top, hence the acceleration to the end range of motion. So, and that's just a different view and angle of it in the slow motion. Then you've got the strength speed. So this is a lot heavier. Again, the strong band and the 4 chain. When you're looking at that strength speed variable, about 0.7 meters per second, as opposed to the peak, which you're gonna be over 1.0. Then when you're looking at like a belt box squat, well, this is just a standard 1-1X tempo. And again, if you look at the band and chain tension, that's all loaded there. Then you have the X1X, which is the dynamic down, slight pause, then the exploding up, or just a standard belt squat itself. You see, this one's actually a 4-1X. This would kind of start us off on our cycle of a 4-second eccentric, a pause into the exploding up. But the common theme is very simple. When you use the variable loading, you can accelerate through the end range of motion. The key aspect is the acceleration. So if you take the variable loading off and you try to accelerate through the end range of motion, you will unsafely leave the ground, then land on the ground with a bar on your back or a belt load. That's extremely unsafe. So the whole concept of the variable loading is exactly what we talked about. It's acceleration through the end range of motion, which is a great concept in the powerlifting world to be able to get, break plateaus and try to peak your max effort squat. But look at what it does from an athletic standpoint. For people that have to sprint, change directions, you want to train maximally through that end range of motion. So when you can accelerate through your end range of motion, that's how it transfers to athletes. Hence, you just have to get very, very creative with different types of athletes that, again, they have to have auxiliary exercises that is more conducive to their sport of sprinting, not just necessarily the performance on the squat. Okay, so that we go like beyond the squat, what I call a hinge. So a few reasons. Number one is a lot of athletes, even at the professional level, just are not comfortable putting a bar on their back, or they cannot put a bar on their back for whatever reason, especially if you have any type of medical condition. And when these guys come out of a season, let's say football, hockey, baseball, I mean, they're not even close to being joint aligned, just from the absolute rigors of the sport. A heavy contact sport like football and hockey, or a one-sided sport like baseball. So they're especially like baseball, they're never gonna be right, left, perfectly symmetrical. We know that. But there's a difference between being gross asymmetrical, which could misalign the spine, which can be identified, and being symmetrical that's within ranges that's normal for a baseball player. But that might take a few weeks of general preparatory and even introducing into the conjugate phase. It's difficult to squat some of those athletes. But when you look at the hinge, here's some different variations. You look at a speed trap bar deadlift, or the same thing from a high position. The supine hip bridge, or a lot of people call it a hip thrust, that you can variable load. The kneeling hip thrust and the pull through. The pull through is probably the most challenging because you really got to get solid footing in terms of loading the band on the plates, but it can be done. Now, sometimes, yes, we'll use the kneeling hip thrust, the speed pull through, as an additional posterior chain-based auxiliary motion. But many times we use it as a primary exercise, even on the lower dynamic day, in place of the squat. Okay, so if we take a look at the single leg then, you've got, I'd say, a few major things. Number one is gonna be the explosive step up, or the rhythm explosive step up. This is probably my favorite go-to, and the reason why I have the stars on the rhythm explosive step up and on the speed high box squat is that has been shown to have the greatest post-activation potentiation. Now, keep in mind that this is just the research that we just got done completed. So we every year we do a lot of in conjunctive research with Nova Southeastern University, where I'm a professor at. So if you guys have seen a lot of the research we're putting out, it's a lot of times based off symmetry. We're looking at gains in speed. We're looking at force plate data, Burtech three-dimensional motion analysis, and things like that. But we're also tracking, because of the force plate stuff in our research question, we're tracking post-activation potentiation. And we're looking at, I think we studied, I want to say 89 NFL players, or players preparing for the NFL in an 8-week cycle. We had variables controls over every aspect of everything. And we're looking at the post-activation potentiation. To my surprise, when we use those two exercises as a variation on the conjugate for whatever reason, it kept showing the highest PAP. So we were so blown away by that, we started implementing it with almost everybody on a peak, and it just kept showing up as the same thing, the highest level of PAP on two exercises that I never would have thought would even fit into a conjugate method. Now, the other good thing about this is you can do diverging forces and different modes, which I'll demonstrate here. I think a hand went up. Did somebody ask a question? Yeah. Well, the kettlebell, the question was, do you use a kettlebell swing? I mean, possibly for an auxiliary exercise, but you can't accelerate through the end range of motion. When I'm talking about a true conjugate method, on a dynamic day, I want to accelerate through the end range of motion. If you accelerate through the end range of motion with a kettlebell swing, you're going to be jumping. So it kind of ceases to have that variable loading aspect. Okay, so now, beyond the squat, we're going in the video here. Now, this is fairly simple. The bridge, or a lot of people call it a thrust, that you can band on the difference of the tempos that I talked about, with obviously accelerating through the end range of motion. To me, this is the go-to. Now, again, you're looking at two high-level NHL players here. Don't think that this is just an NHL workout. It is definitely, go ahead and pause it right here. Pause the video again, please. It is definitely a favorite for the NHL players we train. For whatever reason. I mean, we get a lot out of it, and they get a lot from it. Now, keep in mind, I'd say that out of the hundreds of NHL players we train, I'd say 90% of them are Russian. And they come from a school of training aggressive very early. So I'm not saying it's wrong, but I would definitely say that they're a lot more beat up than we usually get when you have a professional athlete that's 24, like the guys we just showed. So yes, they like the fact that they can accelerate through the end range of motion and get that motion with those types of exercises there. But it's not a hockey workout. It's just very popular with that crowd. But that is something we definitely use for every population we have, especially with young kids. When you start getting into that transition of the growth plate's fully formed, they're 15, 16 years old, they're starting to get very good performance measures on a squat and hinge pattern, then yes, this is a go-to. This is the easiest way to start getting into dynamic motion, which could even be a precursor for speed dynamic squats at that age. Now, this one here, we actually developed this because this belt squat is so well built and you can really variable load it. So because I was having problems getting the absolute load I wanted with the acceleration to the end range of motion on a pull through, we started doing it kneeling. Now, as long as you band the hell out of it, you see the huge bands in the back, it will work. You're just gonna have to kind of go nose to floor, get the full hinge, and yeah, you're gonna have a coach in back moving the lever back and forth in terms of the load and unload, and definitely somebody right there that's kind of coaching them through it. So play the video here. Now these are a 4-1x tempo and a 3-1x tempo, but if you see the fact that you can really isolate that same type of hip hinge. Now, if you look here, that is the band attachment right there. So this is acceleration to the end range of motion. And yes, I mean, I'm not saying this just because I'm speaking at Sornex, but yeah, Sornex did a great job. I wanted this exactly, and they custom built the band my cable stack. Now, if you look at the hinge itself, this one is heavy on the strength speed dynamic. Then we're gonna get more into the speed with the bands and chains. But if you look at the high position to the super high position, to the next speed that's gonna show a high position and a low position, it's just, again, getting into that kind of high box squat range or getting deep down where you're at loading up like 4 chains. But again, you're able to, number one, accelerate to the end range of motion. Now, if you look at, this is the Step Up series here. This is a device called Hero Core because I wanted to put a lateral diverging force across the spine in addition to acceleration to the end range of motion with it. So if you look here, this is actually a professional boxer. So when she came to me, her main issue was she needed a lot of hip power and she had issues in her spine. Now again, yes, this is an NHL player, but just forget the fact that an NHL guy is doing it and it looks kind of hockey specific. But again, this type of work is massive. Now, pause it right here. If you look at this exercise here, this goes back to kind of understanding your audience. We're looking at a professional hockey player that's 37 years old, multiple all-star, with coming off major reconstructive knee surgery, and the theory was he was going to have to retire. So when the team sent him down to me, number one thing is just make sure he likes the weight room, because he doesn't. We're talking about somebody that's 37 that's played in the NHL for like 1,000 years, because, you know, Russians start playing professional like age 12, it seems like. You know, and yes, I did progress to where we got the joint alignment in the knee over time, and we wanted to get into peaking power, because that was his main thing. I feel like I'm losing speed. Even though he is a very high-level talented player, I thought he was losing speed. This was the one exercise we could do to get the acceleration through the end range of motion, and he loved it because it loaded the hip in the position he wanted to be. Now, keep in mind, again, this is not just a hockey-specific workout, even though they're clearly on that undercut position. But the reason why it worked is, again, I got to give a lot of credit to Sornex. I mean, they knew my facility limitations. They custom built my racks for me, and they custom built the device that allowed me to strong, heavy band the cable. So this is actually just like a lot of people use that position as a low cable row. We attach a belt to it, band the hell out of it, and we use the Sornex boxes. You're able to get into these types of positions. But again, the main thing is his intention is jump, and he is accelerating through the end range of motion. Go ahead and play it. So that actually became a favorite of almost all of our athletes. only because it's a very, very simplistic motion in terms of them able to execute the power they want. Now, this is the rhythm here, okay? One's on an air resistance machine, one's on that heavy banded Sornex cable. This is me demonstrating this is what I mean by diverging force. So again, pause the video here. If you look at the difference, so Braden, the big lineman that was doing it on a back load, it was air resistance up to max effort. And you see that he was able to get the redirection of the foot into the acceleration at the end range of motion. And then right at the top, it's the dynamic eccentric load crash down. And then Cole, the other guy, who's a DB, was doing it. He was doing it from the max effort load. So when you're looking at like some of the literature coming out, which I think is great, of strength, speed versus speed strength, the 0.70 meters per second versus the 1.0 plus meters per second, we kind of follow that timeline. If I've got a 3-week microcycle or a 2-week microcycle of conjugate, yes, we might start at 0.85, go back down to 0.7, accelerate back up to 1.0 plus. So it's easy to do on our velocity-based training system. We're on a squat rack. But the good thing about those OVR systems and stuff like that we use is we can attach it to the hip. You look at the velocity-based training was actually tapped to those athletes' hips. So we can still look at body velocity in addition to bar velocity on things like this and progress in a very, very similar manner. And because you can band the weight stacks now, this becomes extremely effective, especially when I want to do the rhythm. So I initially developed this because I was getting frustrated that I love the conjugate method. I wanted to implement it with athletes that were just so damn beat up from the season. I had too short of a window. So I started saying, okay, you know what? I got to get their foot to reflex. I need the dynamic eccentric load. And when you crash down and reflex, it redirects. And again, to our surprise, that was one of the highest levels of PAP. Once we got into that, I'd say 0.70 to 0.85 meters per second on the max band loaded explosive step up, that was it. And then, yes, we could start doing different diverging forces. So if you play the video here, that's a strong bungee. So if you look at when I come up and I eccentric load, I will have to get into foot eversion, but then I redirect quickly to get back into the position. So we actually use the diverging forces as complexes with our speed stuff on the field and different types of speed strength, not strength speed. The speed strength peak when we're going into the tail end of a conjugate. Okay, so now if you're looking at the tempos and velocity, this is just kind of summarizing a lot of the stuff I already talked about. Okay, now these are some of the things that we have had success with. Keep in mind that we've done a lot of different variations that's beyond this, but for athletes that are not powerlifters, that have to do a lot of sprinting, this is some of the things that we found to have worked. So let's say if we're doing a lower dynamic microcycle and we have, let's say, a 3-week microcycle and we're doing squat. This is sometimes some of the stuff that's worked well for us, like a 4.2x tempo, a 4.1x tempo. That's getting into that strength speed. And by the way, yeah, I think Dr. Brian Mann is putting out some outstanding literature. A lot of the stuff that I'm talking about, yes, I did get from a lot of his research and literature. And then the PAP concepts I got from Dr. Newton. Now, I'm a little bit biased because Dr. Newton chaired my thesis, but Dr. Newton, I think, really came into the forefront of the data and the literature that you can use and explode into different versions. But anyway, that's kind of my application of the literature and the research I found on strength speed versus speed strength with the different velocity markers. So once you start progressing into the 2-on-X tempo, which again is the 2 seconds down, 1 second pause without relaxing with the exploding up to a variable load, that gets up into that 0.85 to 0.9. Then obviously your ultimate level is at some point in week 2, week 3, is to get to that dynamic eccentric load. I think that is the key to the conjugate method, where you are going to dive bomb the squat, but catch it right before the position, stay tight on the box, then explode up. So now it's not always meaning that the X1X is gonna be in week 3, and that's always gonna coincide with the 1.0 plus, which is that speed strength. But that definitely is a common theme that works well for us. Now, keep in mind, if they are trained and aligned the way that we want, and they're ready for X1X, we'll put them in all 3 weeks if we could. You know, this is kind of a build-up and a lead-in to the ultimate dynamic eccentric load that is such a hard transfer to the field. Now, the deadlift, same concept. We'll never dynamically eccentrically load a deadlift. It's gonna be always a slow eccentric or a normal eccentric into an explosive concentric. Then when you're looking at the bridge and the thrust, I've got a lot of success with the 3-3X, the 3-1X. You know, and yes, I probably got a lot of my literature from Brett Contreras, who I think does a great job. If you look at some of the literature and some of the research he produces, yes, keep in mind, he's speaking to his audience. You know, just like powerlifting programs will speak to their audience. So Brett's audience is people that like to have a shapely butt and things like that, and he does very, very well. But if you look at the concepts of what he's doing and all of the literature that has kind of proven some theories that he loves to publicize in terms of development of the glute max, it makes a lot of sense. But why can't you put that onto the max effort side or the dynamic side or both within a conjugate method? And we were finding really, really good results. As I said, going back to that PAP factor, it was the kneeling thrust, the banded hip thrust at that 0.9 level, and that, surprisingly, that high box squat, which was only hinging maybe 30 degrees, if that, okay? So, yeah, do you have a question? Sorry.
Can you tell us what your testing methods were to measure your PAP on a...
Yeah. The question was, what's our testing methods? We use Vault a lot, the force plates. So the research that we're producing has the different levels of the force plate data. So for example, and I'm gonna show some programs here in a second. I'm gonna actually pull up an Excel file of what was some of the things we used. So we would, let's say, go from a dynamic squat into 2 jumps on the force plate and then take like a 30, 45 second rest and repeat. Or on the max effort day, we would do 2 jumps on a force plate into the power-based exercise that was by design. So like, let's say, for example, we were doing a loaded single leg Bulgarian squat or a loaded hip thrust, immediately into 1 or 2 jumps on the force plate just to get that post-activation potentiation data, and then into the power-based exercise that we had designed within the program, like a jammer rotation or a seated box jump or something like that. But that was done for the research. Now, keep in mind that we were well beyond. We had multiple force plates going, and we did probably every test that's in the Vault database, from the depth jumps to the RSI to what started to become my favorite was it looks like a clean pull from a concentric, because I wanted to really get the right left symmetry, and that showed me a lot of that data. So most of it was through the Vault system. Now, yes, we started using the Nord board and things like that as well, but I'd say the majority of the research that we started going into discussion boards was the force plate, just standard force plate jump and land, or I think they called it jump squat on the protocol, okay? Now, if you look at the differences, the pull-through, again, we're not gonna do a dynamic pull-through in terms of the eccentric, but it's still a good hinge. Now, the step up, yes. I mean, we're looking at the XXX to the X1X, meaning that, let's say I'm on my explosive step up, and I can redirect up quick and then right back down quick, or up quick and pause, and then I'm gonna crash down. The up and pause forces the crash down, which again is kind of the point. Now you're gonna get an eccentric load on the hip itself as well as at the ankle joint, which I'm gonna kind of explain a little bit later on why that's important, okay? Now, if you look in, well, yeah, I guess I already addressed this. This is how we tracked it. So good question. And one thing I wanted to keep in mind is, you see the point there of redirecting the research. This is crucial. When I say redirecting the research, look at some of the literature that I have presented, okay? If you're familiar with the work of Brett Contreras or Brian Mann or Dr. Robert Newton, and a lot of the people that I get a lot out of their literature, they've never actually studied a conjugate method with people going into the NFL, with NHL players that have a 6-week window, with NHL draft prep, with Major League Baseball guys that have 4 weeks, go to winter ball, and have 3 weeks. You know what I'm saying? It's not like the literature directly proved any of my methods. But this is my point. I read the literature and applied it the way I understand it. Did a bunch of different protocols. I present it and redirect it back into the research community. Now, I have the luxury of doing that because I'm a professor at Nova, and my deal with that complex is I do need to produce research for them. But all I'm doing is presenting all the data that I have collected, bringing it back into the research community at Nova. Then they shape the research question, which gets an IRB approval, and away we go. But I was actually discussing a lot of this last night. The interesting thing about the last 3 years, and we've done 5 research studies in the last 3 years, a lot of it on this type of stuff, was the most interesting findings have to end up in the discussion board because it wasn't even relating to the IRB question at hand. But it's interesting to discuss it, open it up. Now different people can kind of use this methodology in their own way, but always present it and redirect it back in the research community. So has this actually been proven in the exact methodology that I've done? No. I mean, well, the other methods of symmetry that I was studying, yes. But this stuff, no, it's just a discussion board. So yes, I'm just telling you what my findings are, and I hope that 15 people see it and say, let's do a research article on the PAP effect that was in the discussion of Pete's research that was based off of symmetry and gains in speed, even though we were technically tracking and modifying everything, okay? So I think redirecting the research is a key component of everything. Now, looking at, this is probably one of the heavier ones that we write, and I apologize for the print, so I'm hoping you guys in the back can see it. But if you have problems seeing it, I can definitely just, I think, Bert does a good job of putting this online, and I can email you all this stuff in terms of the slides and stuff. But the main concept is I mapped it out where you're looking at the upper body on day 1, day 3, the lower body on day 2, day 4. Now, our typical split would be a Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. That's the favorite of ours in terms of making this work, if you have the capacity to do that. But if you look at the dynamics of lower body, for example, you see the speed box squat, which has 2-1X or X1X. Now, you look at the 8 to 14 times 2 to 3, the range of the number of sets was actually determined by the PAP that we were gauging. If the PAP was going up, we were going. If the PAP leveled off, we were stopping. Hence, some people stopped at 6 or 7 sets, and some people literally did 14 sets. So the 2 to 3 was basically if we knew that they screwed up, yes, we're going to do an extra rep of 3. And if you look at everything in yellow, you see how it's like the assisted double jump or the force plate, the assisted continuous jump or the force plate. So this was actually a heavy conjugate methodology, but we were kind of in that reversal power, meaning we were going assisted plyometrics with the triphasic bars, which ended up working great for us. And the crazy thing is, a few times we actually started seeing a dip in the PAP, went back and hit the assisted double jump after a lower variable loaded speed squat, and the PAP shot right back up. So we're looking at the actual PAP effect of the depth jump itself, okay? Now, if you look at the dynamic upper, you just look at a standard speed bench press with chains, and then you look, we actually put the speed dynamic rows on the max effort day. And yes, these are the athletes we were training were getting into conjugate, I think, a lot quicker than we would liked. So a lot of times we've got a really good off season of general preparatory phase and intensification. We went into this. With these guys, we had a short window. We had like 6 weeks. So the reason I didn't feel that we were that aligned upper body, hence you see a lot of people ask me, why the hell is the floor press in your second complex when you're doing a ton of posterior chain work? Well, I could get a lot of things that I could get done in terms of the alignment that I wanted. Now, the other part of it is don't get freaked out by the term corrective. To me, that's just an easy way of saying this is the determined rest period that we're gonna have, or this is something that I need to be productive. So, for example, if they do have any type of weaknesses in foot inversion, which is extremely common, as you know, from athletes coming off the season, well, I'll put an isometric foot inversion exercise surrounding my upper press. Or if they do have issues with the posture. For me, it's just, I'm very simple. I love the stuff that Dr. Serrano was doing. To us, that's just standard part of what we call corrective exercise work. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean we're correcting their posture, but if they have posture-related issues that's due to trauma in sport, and we identify scar tissue built up, Yes, my therapists are gonna start to release that over time and increase blood flow, but what significantly gets them stronger isometrically is those types of, we call them bow wall sits and all the other types of versions we do. So a lot of the stuff that he was doing, we're saying, this is from a therapy standpoint to fix pain. We just implement as a standard part of our program. But to me, that's not gonna interfere with a loaded Bulgarian squat. So to me, I like doing things that are non-interference just to be productive during my rest periods. Or if something's going to support the actual motion. Now, we see this a lot, that people are strong as shit in the hips, but have extremely weak and or inhibited abductors. So to me, I don't think there's anything wrong, and I actually get a lot of this personally, of doing an isolated hip abduction machine surrounded by something like the posterior chain loaded auxiliary work, the hyper or the glute ham raise, or putting it into the prep, or actually sometimes surrounding it to the loaded Bulgarian squat. Now, is your hip gonna repair in terms of like the 3 to 4 minute rest? Your nervous system might be a little bit lower because you're loading isolated hip abduction machine work, of course, but what's the drop in strength? Maybe 15, 20%. But if it's gonna get the joint aligned the way that I want to strengthen those abductors, to me, that's the most functional thing you can do for somebody that has that dysfunction. So, I guess we could rename it isolated exercises or non-interference, single joint, but the term corrective just fits on a paper. That's why we put it there. Now, if you go to a max effort, this looks a little bit more like somebody that is an experienced squatter and or experienced bench. The one thing we do about bench with all athletes is we use the hammer grip bar and all the different variations, whether it's the Kabuki, the Sornex, the Elite. We've got a whole series of the hammer grip bars. I just think it's a lot more conducive to multi-sport athletes, especially ones that get hit or ones that just have a lot of different types of trauma. I'm just not a big believer in anybody outside the powerlifting world benching with the straight bar. It's just gonna be a lot more conducive to the shoulder joint in terms of how the shoulder joint functions. So anytime you see bench press, just automatically assume it's gonna be at the straight bar, a hammer grip bar. Unless I'm training somebody for the NFL Combine, then by default, I have to use a straight bar because that's the way the test works. But the main difference you see here is you look at the speed rows got put on the speed press day. In addition to that, we changed the Bulgarian to a bar step up. Now, that whole 10-8-6-6 is moderate strength, but that can be changed within the differences of the PAP effect we found. So if the PAP went up, we started loading and dropping the volume. Hence, we were doing like max effort sets of 1, 2, and 3 as that 2-set complex to finish out that. So that ended up working out well for us. Now, if somebody cannot handle it, we can just go to that step up, use a bar, a transformer bar, a Duffalo bar, or just use a belt load, or as you said, we just switched right to a rhythm explosive step ups on the Kaiser and or on the cable stack with the bands. Now, the upper dynamics, a little bit different. Now, in terms of the bench, as I said, we'll use the hammer grip bar. I'm not gonna show a lot of videos on that. I think we all know what that is in terms of bench pressing with the different types of tempos. Now, one thing I will never do is the XXX, and I get it. Like, I've done the powerlifting cycles myself. I've worked with powerlifters. I don't train powerlifters, but those types of athletes that come in and see a guy like me, powerlifting, Olympic lifting, CrossFitters, strongmen, they're usually coming in with confounding injuries they can't fix. That's what they usually come to me for. So go to my medical room that's just attached to my weight room, and what type of supplemental exercises can I do specific to my body to increase my performance on my clean or my squat? That's usually what I see out of those types of people. So I don't want to misrepresent myself like I train powerlifters. I only train powerlifters to keep them in alignment to do their program better. However, I do definitely get the effect and the benefit of an XXX tempo if you're an experienced lifter. If you're not, it is just too dangerous. The bang isn't worth the buck. I don't mind occasionally an X1X, but the XXX to me is just too much. But I'd say a lot of it is just beyond the bench press. Now, all overhead athletes will do versions of this. I will not hammer grip bar or straight bar an overhead athlete. The symmetry is just always going to be there based on the nature of their sport. So I just don't think that you can reset the symmetry closer to where you want it in terms of the acceptable range that's not gonna misalign spine if you're constantly pressing on a bar. I think it's just too much work on the shoulders, too many other things that can be done. Again, let's go back to the basics. What is the upper dynamic? It's extension, acceleration through the end range of motion. You can replicate that with stuff that is not on a standard bench, okay? So look at, like, for example, the jammer arms and air resistance. Now, I do say things like hockey and soccer. They're not technically overhead sports, but they are deeply rooted in rotation. And keep in mind, sprinting athletes rotate more than people think. If you just look at the actual momentum force created when you're doing max effort sprinting. If you look at, easiest way to describe this is watching an Olympic sprinter. Look at them from the side. The cycle is moving so fast, it looks like they're riding an imaginary bike, right? Well, think of the momentum force that's created with that. If you are accelerating on the recovery phase, the residual recovery up to this transition phase, you're putting so much momentum force on the spine, it's causing a hip hike. When you come forward from the transition into the ground prep, it's pulling the pelvis forward into pelvic approximation, or upward, the trunk rotation. Now, obviously, your goal as a performance coach is to make the isometric values of the pelvic approximators and the spinal lateral flexors so strong isometrically, it can withstand that whipping force. Hence, you don't have the hip hike and the hip rotation. So all times you are max effort sprinting, there is a significant amount of trunk rotation involved. It's just isometric, withstanding a momentum force. So yes, even with sometimes if we want to peak somebody's max effort sprint work, whether it's a sport-specific motion or linear sprint, sometimes putting the rotational aspect onto the dynamic works well for us. So really quick, going back to remember the basics. I already covered this, speak to your audience, program for your audience. Like an example I just said. If you have a wide receiver or defensive back, what difference does it really make what their bench press number is? The dynamic works for them, and if I'm looking at a dynamic upper body motion, a lot of times I might choose that type of explosive rotation. And beyond that, you're looking at the, in quotes, non-lifters. I see this more than not, especially when you get to the professional level. You get a wide receiver in the NFL. They are just not going to lift weights. So they all come in with same story. I got beat up in college. I did this. I was forced to do that. I'm done with it. I'm tired of my body hurting. I got hurt doing this. I hear it nonstop. And I'm not saying anything negative against college strength coaches. A lot of times it's just the nature of the person itself, not the coach. I'm just telling you the feedback. So some of the biggest wins is getting guys like that to understand they're not going to get big and bulky. They're not going to get injured. You can do explosive work. And when they want to know why it's specific, you go right back to that hip hike pelvic rotation example. You just got to dummy it down so they understand it. So I'm explaining it in more performance coaching terms. If you can explain that to, yes, you can sprint faster because of this, especially with all these lightning fast athletes that have superhuman hips and normal people's spinal rotators. That in itself convinces them to get into a conjugate method. So a lot of times it's just doing things that you know your athletes are going to get benefit out of, but what they're also going to buy into to actually attend the damn weight room and get done what you want to get accomplished, okay? And plus one other thing, remember, when you look at some of these conjugate phases that are brilliant, by the way, this is where I got everything that I've learned from this. I'd say 90% of it I got from the powerlifting community. It's brilliant. But their auxiliary and assistance exercises are speaking to their audience. Exercises that's going to help you perform better in the bench, the squat, and the deadlift. That is their sport. If you are moving, you've got a lot of exercises that need to be done in the frontal plane. You have a lot of single joint exercises that need to be isolated, a lot of ankle work. This is stuff I wouldn't say is not important for powerlifters, but you look at the level of importance of a frontal plane motion for an elite level lacrosse player or soccer player or running back versus a powerlifter that's not sprinting and changing directions. The order of importance is changing. So when you're looking at upper body, this is a standard 4-1X tempo. This is on the strength speed. So the gauge on this exercise is that 0.65, 0.7 meters per second. But if you just start looking at anything you can accelerate through the end range of motion. This is where the jammer arms come into play, okay? You could go half kneeling. This is actually a favorite of a lot of those pain in the ass athletes that don't want to train. Because, now this again, you're gonna see an abundance of NHL players and an abundance of Major League Baseball players in this video. What I don't want you to get the assumption is it's only built for hockey and for baseball. But go ahead and pause the video. That was an interesting one right there because that athlete, again, came to me on the wrong side of 30. He missed 2 NHL seasons because of a shoulder surgery, apparently was botched, resurgery, rehab, done in Craig, whatever. He was supposed to retire. And came into me with just, I'm a clean slate, forget what you read in the media, forget anything else. What do you see medically? What do I need to do? And I just gave him my opinion. He's like, okay, this makes sense to me, let's go. And yes, we got into a conjugate phase. For somebody that was literally supposed to retire from the NHL, and I'm not trying to take credit for his success, but he had a career year after one off season. And we did a lot of this conjugate stuff. Now, once we got the shoulder capsule to move the way that we wanted, and we got the symmetry within the upper spine and the neck, which we thought was causing the majority of the issues anyway, and then we corrected, and then it was like, kind of like, oh, by the way, I've got this degenerative bone disease in my knees, and I did plyometrics in Russia from like age 0. So now I'm like, okay, was there anything else I needed to fix? Well, yes, we actually went to conjugate methods with him on a lot of these types of exercises once we got the shoulder capsule where we wanted. Now, go ahead and play the video. Some of the stuff you're gonna look at isometrics. So I love the fact that you can get the acceleration through the end range of motion of whether it could be horizontal adduction and or elbow extension, but you can also look at, are you looking at a non-pivot foot or a pivot foot? Forget sports specificity, think of what muscle action it does. This one is gonna get more approximation. The other one is gonna get more adduction. One is gonna expose the shoulder a little bit more, one's gonna expose the shoulder a little bit less in terms of what you can stabilize. But this one here, in terms of the double and the stabilization, this was, from my therapist standpoint, some of the most effective corrective work we did on that shoulder. So, or you could just start putting in different types of diverging forces of upper to lower transfer, or I'm sorry, lower to upper transfer and things like that. So, or you could get into this type of diverging force. Now, yes, this definitely works for baseball because of the hip torque and the pelvic approximation we're doing, but keep in mind, this is all still the acceleration through the end range of motion, whether it's the overhand grip, the underhand grip. The underhand grip just puts a lot more emphasis on the trunk. Now, this is okay as long as somebody has, I'd say, guaranteed cleared symmetry through our therapy staff in terms of the ratio we want. We don't mind getting into hardcore single arm work like this, okay? It works, it's effective, but yeah, this became a favorite for a lot of, like, that's a Major League Baseball pitcher there, of people that wanted to peak power, but you have to slightly modify it and based off the concepts, okay? So you could do the reverse rotation, you just do the standard acceleration. Now this, again, if this is still accelerated to the other range of motion, whether it's a chop or the lift, looking at the flex line there, or the air resistance Kaiser, or again, the brilliance of the fact that we can now easily band our weight stacks, it becomes extremely effective in terms of not only looking at, if you look at the lateral spinal flexion and pelvic approximation trunk rotation isometrics, along with that dynamic of elbow extension, which is crucial, not just for overhead athletes and hockey players, but again, especially in hardcore start-stop, hard acceleration sports like soccer and lacrosse and basketball, or the max effort sprinting because of the momentum force that I just described. Now, if we're looking at a lighter based conjugate, now this is the kind of stuff that gets made fun of a lot more, especially if you're a hardcore lifter, but just look at it conceptually. So number one is if you look at the lower body dynamic, you see the speed band hip thrust. That could either be supine or standing, and again, in terms of getting the effect we want, I love the thrust because I do believe what Brett Contreras preaches. In terms of the glute max development and everything that he seems to be proving time and time again, we are seeing the application from that literature, definitely. Now, the kettlebell front rotation, this is just more of an isometric single leg strengthening exercise. So it's not a max effort day. It's actually a very, very slow tempo with a lot of diverging forces of pelvic approximation and horizontal abduction and adduction. That's what that's designed for. It works great. It's just outside the norm of, well, wait, where's my max effort work? There's already not max effort work. Now, when we get into some of the lateral lunges, then yes, that is designed to be a frontal plane day when you're looking at the Bulgarian rotation into the lateral lunge reach and the stationary bar lateral lunge that sometimes we do on a slow eccentric and sometimes we do on a dynamic eccentric with that same type of work that we worked at in terms of the dynamic eccentric load. Or we can look at a hardcore hinge emphasis. Now, this started to become popular with those athletes that had strong hips and for whatever crazy reason had inefficient glute. We started seeing a trend. Now, I'm gonna tread carefully because this is not proven. This is just a trend we definitely saw. You get those long femur athletes, it was almost universal. Like a defensive end that might be 6'5", 6'6", but the femur length, they should be 7 feet tall. Or even me, like I'm only 5'10" and a half, but if you look at the length of my femur, yes, it's for most people that are 6'6", 6'5", if you actually look at the dimension of that. Now, it's my benefit because I can run really fast. It's not my benefit because I always had problems squatting because of that type of lever. So people have abnormal levers. This works great because I wouldn't say we don't squat them. We might transformer bar, high box squat them to get that effect I want. But we got a lot more effect off of those built types people by looking at the dynamic was the speed kneeling hip thrust you saw off the back end of that belt squat and the supine hip bridge thrust with heavy loaded weight. Now for us, we're just gonna use the pivot pad on a bar and like roll a bar. But the great thing is there's so many great machines out there that you can really maximally load a hip thrust. So we actually did the double leg motion on both days with the dynamic and on the max effort day. And it worked great. But the other thing you see is what's the other common theme you see here? There is a lot of frontal plane work. It's one thing our therapists kind of beat into our head is they said, you know, the trend we're seeing is you're doing so great at the sprinting and the PAP and all the stuff you're tracking. Yet some of these people that are still that come in with the groin issues, we fix it initially, then it kind of comes back and forth into the nagging. They just said, listen, in our opinion, Pete, you're a great programmer, you're just not doing enough frontal plane motion. So it kind of hit home. I was a little pissed at first, but then I kind of came to my senses and started looking at the ratios and things like that. And we started looking at, and they said, look, with the conjugate thing you've developed off the conjugate methodology, what's wrong with just doing that in a frontal plane? And I never actually heard anybody ask me that before. I was like, actually nothing. It's actually a great concept. Now, it's a bitch to get in with these tempos. This is actually like a week 3. But it ended up working with tremendous results when we're looking at overall tracking of performance. Now, the other question you had was the tracking of performance. We definitely looked at the PAP with the force plate data. But we tracked everything in terms of the 5-yard velocity, the 10-20 splits, all the different types of metrics we can do in terms of vertical power, horizontal power, in addition to the force plate and the Nord board. And we were seeing when the PAP started peaking on the tail end of these conjugate phases, as long as the right left symmetry was lower than 7%, we started seeing a peak transfer to the field. And that kind of brings us to our next aspect, the dynamic eccentric load. Now, one thing I don't have time to get into like a whole speed training lecture, but the one thing people ask me about is how does this transfer? The beauty of dynamic is at some point with some type of an exercise, you're gonna get into the dynamic eccentric load into that catch isometrically, which proponents the reversal strength. To me, that is the key. No matter if you're using a squat or a hinge, when you start doing that and then introducing that on complexes with your speed training, that's the transfer. So what I mean by that is let's say that you have a sport motion. Okay, a running back that's gonna jump and do a jump cut. A basketball player that's doing shuffles and sprinting. You know, the hockey player that's doing our dryland plyometric sequences. You know, offensive-minded basketball, soccer, lacrosse versus defensive-minded basketball, soccer, lacrosse in terms of backward open-up motions or forward multi-motions, right? That's application. Full-speed sprinting in a motion that is required. What we would do is we would superset with similar dynamic eccentric loads with diverging forces to get the isometric effect of the adductor, horizontal adductor, the abductor, horizontal abductor, or the gastrosoleus complex. Our philosophy is very simple. You raise the threshold with these technical and or plyometric drills, and you apply it into the sport motion. And within a given session, if you cycle back and forth in a given microcycle, you will then apply the raised threshold. It's built in the weight room, and then this is the transfer. So this is some basic examples we have. Now this is just a standard. If you pause it right here, you look at the assist-resist complex. This is a very, very, very strong bungee. So you could attach it on the strong bungee within the Raptor or the ultra-strong bungee on the fence. So all we're really looking at is when you're going med ball up and down, it's a dynamic eccentric load with a diverging force. And when you assist over, yes, you're gonna put a lot more emphasis on the ankle, the knee. When you're driving out, it's hip, and then when you land, it's a lot of the eccentric load with the horizontals, okay? On this one here, it's a little bit easier because you're able to use the arm action. So this one is kind of coming up and down on the dynamic lateral plus vertical. This one's just a lot more lateral. Okay, go ahead and play it again. Now, if you look at this, go ahead and pause it. This is obviously resist out, assist back, which means that the more aggressive load is at the support chain. Toe, forefoot, rear foot, ankle, transition up into the knee. The lighter load is up at the knee joint. When he's jumping forward, it's actually just building up a tolerance, the last line of defense, which is the ACL. So the hamstring has to engage in order to keep the tibia from projecting forward when you're hitting into that force. So, but again, if you watch the land, it's hit dynamic eccentric load. When I come back, it's dynamic eccentric load. It just transferred from here, down to here. Okay, go ahead and play the video again. And that's just a side view. Now, when you get into these types of positions, depending on where you anchor the band and depending on the level, okay? Go ahead and pause it here. So if you look now, it's just a very, very, very baseline eccentric load. I'm only getting this much range, but I am blowing up my abductors. And to an extent, depending on where I'm at with my range, the rotators. Now I'll play the video again. This is kind of like just setting the table of something we might do in the prep before we actually get into the complexes. Now we get into the dynamic eccentric load with that same diverging force. So the essential component was built in the weight room. Whether you're going inside leg, outside leg, continuous or the drop, you're looking at adduction versus abduction. Internal versus external rotation, horizontal abduction versus horizontal adduction, okay? And to an extent, you're definitely getting the support chain in the back, especially when the loaded leg, which is his right leg, is going in the back, okay? Now, this is, pause the video here. This is definitely going back into the support chain. This would be like applying the rhythm explosive step-ups in the conjugate phase. So what I mean, the reason why I like to transfer is a lot of these sport motions are aggressive. Like there's kind of like a love-hate relationship with the new cool thing on social media. What is it? It is the back pedal into the forward sprint. And all the science nerds love to go on and on and on about how detrimental it is and look at how many people were videotaping it and blew out their Achilles. And there's a increase in Achilles injuries, which there's not. They just love to say it because a couple of people got injured doing it. And I like the fact that they're actually bringing one thing to the table. Within an off season, you can't keep replicating sport motions. If you're a defensive back in football and you just played 7 months of football with as much lifting as you can get through the traumatic football season, no, I don't think you should be doing a back pedal to a 45 down cut in February, okay? I just don't think you should be doing it. I agree with at least they're bringing that to the forefront. But the conclusion of don't do it is kind of stupid. I don't mean to be sounding so mean and unprofessional, but I don't know how else to say it, but you have to be able to train the damn motions. The unlocking factor is you can't just, well, you know what? This is what defensive backs do, let's do it. This is what defensive soccer players do, let's do it. There's got to be a progression over time. We have to understand that this is extremely traumatic to that joint. But how do you prepare the joint? It's a micro progression over time, just like anything else. You have to get the gastroc strong. You have to get the gastroc strong eccentrically. You have to get the gastroc strong dynamically eccentrically. You got to do baseline plyometrics, looking at the motions, and now play the video, and then gradually start to intensify it with baseline drills back and forth, whether it's a back load or transitioning now into a front load, which is going to get that dorsiflexion, or with here, the load comes on plantar flexion. And this isn't necessarily just a football defensive back drill, even though it looks a little specific because of how definitive their motion is of the 45 downs and all that. Go ahead and pause it here. Or you could look at the exact same concept with what is a dynamic eccentric load? It's more of an isometric eccentric load on the hip joint while you're doing the same kind of plantar flexion, dorsiflexion at the gastrocnemius complex, but now introducing rotation and inversion, eversion forces. So what we do is, it's not like we have a day where that's all we're doing. We are constantly going back and forth. Sport motion, raise threshold. Sport motion, raise threshold. It ends up becoming a very, very good system. Go ahead and play the video. Or getting into any of these type of diverging forces. Again, where is the eccentric load? Hip, left leg, support chain, right leg. You could get into the lateral position, you could get into the crossover position, and you could do the diverging force from all different 4 positions. Or do jump and land, or do rhythm jumps, or do explosive jumps. All this can be extremely beneficial with the transfer. But you see the common theme? Get the conjugate to accelerate the end range of motion, progress the dynamic eccentric load. Then have some intelligent progressions of how to transfer it to the field. Am I over? Okay, yeah, that was the last slide. So I guess anybody have any questions? I think, Pat, your hand flew up, didn't it?
I think you mentioned earlier an example of athletes that have strong hips and weak glutes.
Yes.
I want to know, what does that look like? How did you figure that out? What do you do about it?
I give a lot of credit to my physical therapy staff. You know, I would not, I'd be lying if I said I knew their exact methodology of how they do their strength testing combined with the force plate data. I've watched some of it, but some of it's kind of going over my head. For some reason, when they give me a report to focus on hip extension, it's to me, it always goes back to, okay, let's start hinging. And I kept seeing the trend of this long femur people position. So when we got them into squatting or single leg squatting or any type of really hardcore loaded hip drive, they were like superhuman. You know, we would get them on our incline treadmill. We'd look at all our metrics. We'd get them on push sled work. They'd squat the house. Their PAP was through the roof. And yet, you get them into a hinge, they could barely do it body weight. And they kept having, I'd say, issues with the extension that I wanted. We're looking at the motion analysis. They just could not get that extension I want out of a deep bending start, out of a change of direction. Then we started hinging and coming back to the same exact motion analysis, and the extension was just automatic without even me talking about it, not doing any extra plyometrics, which used to be my go-to. So I wish I could identify how they're identifying this. All I know is I put a lot of stock into my therapist to be able to identify that, okay? But I would say this, there's a lot of bridge testing that they do. And they look at a lot of symmetry, right, left, and they get a lot of force plate data. And if it's asymmetrical, they always almost like default into, okay, there is a weakness here. So hence, let's look at muscle activation techniques of activating inhibition. Let's put it before dynamic lifting. Let's change the squat patterns and hinging patterns, and it seemed to work. Now, why that always trended towards the long femur people, I don't know. I wish I had that answer. I wish that would be studied, but that's a good question. Yeah, so.
Can we do questions? Can we get a question? Like, can you ask him or like have it pulled a little bit later? Are you around here to be able to like ask questions too? Like,
I'm here till Sunday, man. Right. We can keep rolling.
We got to kind of keep on because we have a live stream coming in an hour. If that's fine, I'm sorry.
All right. Amen.
I love you.